City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nation and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. I need consent agenda approved. I need somebody to move and second the recommendations 1A and B.
So moved.
Welcome, Doug. All right, so moved by Councillor Chandler, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Approved. We have one piece of correspondence from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Small Communities Funds. The FCM is requesting a voluntary contribution of $131.40 towards the FCM Small Communities Fund, which assists small communities in sending elected officials to participants in the FCM board or standing committee meetings. Staff are requesting council direction on how to address this occurring. So first off, I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor.
I'll move it.
Seconded by
Second that.
Councillor O'Brien. Okay, discussion? Anybody want to say anything?
This is Councillor Greer. Have we paid for this before?
I believe we have. I'm looking to, yeah, they're telling me they have. Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, I can speak to this, Your Worship. This came up last year. It was a small community fund, and we approved it at that time last year.
Thank you. I'm wondering, does the province not contribute to, should they not be contributing to this? I mean, I think that would be their responsibility. I mean, 131 bucks is not worth having even a discussion about, but I'm just curious as to why that is. Anyways, so I would like to call on, okay, be received. I need number one, part of the motion that requests, where's the money that says we're going to give it? Oh, we need a motion. I'm sorry, that's why it's not here. We need a motion to approve paying the 131. Okay.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, Councillor Patterson. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Carried. Thank you. We're going to flop around a bit on this. I'm sorry, but it'll get smoother as we go. Mr. Russell, could you please give us a background on the issue regarding the development variance permit on Hirst?
Yes, if I may, Worship, the city has received an application from McDonald Gray Consultants on behalf of the property owner, Mode Hirst Living Solutions Inc. The applicant is requesting the issuance of a development variance permit and development permit to facilitate a 12-home townhouse development on the subject property. At this time, the recommendation is to seek advancement to proceed with notice for the 4 variances that are requested. The specific variances are for to allow privacy screens within the usable open space area. There's a front yard relaxation to 4.5 meters. There's also a fence height relaxation to incorporate trellises into the fence, as well as a variance to the parking requirements from 1.5 to 1.2 parking spaces per dwelling. The recommendations are as per the agenda.
Thank you. I need a mover and a seconder for, and we can take all 3 recommendations together if you wish to move this along. So, are you prepared to make a motion on all 3?
Aye.
Councillor O'Brien.
Second.
Oh, Councillor Chandler. Any discussion?
Teresa has a question. Teresa has a question.
Oh,
No, it's all right. Thank you.
you sure?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't. I've got to get used to looking in 4 directions here at one time. So we'll do this. All right. If there's no discussion, I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Mr. Doxey, could you please give us the background on the issue regarding award of professional services for Bagshaw Street?
Yes, sir. If I may, through your worship. So Bagshaw Street is a capital project that was on the radar for, I believe it was 2028. But nonetheless, during the budget discussions this year, we talked about with some of the adjacent activities and work going on there with the recent completion of the Jensen Greenway and the commercial activity and the pressures that it puts onto the pedestrian network to move this capital project forward in the timeline. And so it is on the radar for this year. And this is brought to council for the execution of the professional services contract portion of this work. As you can see in the report, it is within the budget identified. It did garner a competitive process with four proponents bringing in pricing, and what we have here is the highest scoring and lowest price for complete proposal before us, and the recommendations are as per the report. Any questions?
Thank you. Let's get it on the floor first. So we can talk about it. I need someone to move. We can move all three items together if you like. Somebody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Patterson, second by
Seconded.
Okay. Discussion?
Yes.
O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And question through to Mr. Doxey on this one. If you can hear me okay, Joe?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to confirm anyways, regarding the Bagshaw Street upgrade project, we had a Parks and Trail Committee meeting with Mr. Guy, that's down in my bottom left-hand corner there. So the thing is that when we talked about this Bagshaw Street extension or upgrade project, we had mentioned the fact that somehow, some way on the Jensen Greenway, the irrigation line was omitted or neglected or forgotten somehow. At this particular time, we thought it would be a good opportunity if we could be included in the scope of that package to have the irrigation line, because Bagshaw does intercept or actually cuts right in half the Jensen Greenway. So what we're asking is if that is part of your scope of work on Bagshaw, that at least a stub could be made on both sides of Bagshaw to allow for irrigation to be constructed up the Jensen Greenway.
From the engineering design perspective, or for the purpose of executing the professional services award, we should be able to encompass that within the scope of the work of the engineering component. It may lead to the construction cost. It may affect the construction cost, which will, as the design is completed, we can reflect that towards the end of the year, so that either we have a new construction budget for any kind of changes to the Jensen Greenway, or if it's just the subs on Bagshaw and or Corfield, we can identify those independently as construction cost components. But from a design perspective, we can get those on the table for sure.
As a follow-up, Your Worship, thank you for that, Joe. And I believe that's exactly what we need. I realize the project hasn't gone out for tender when that would have to be laid out properly in the tender. But as far as I was just worried a little bit about the design engineering services, it's not we're asking for anything too elaborate, but I just thought it should be at least talked about and included at this stage.
For sure, I think it's totally doable.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Councillor Wilson, is your hand up here? There you go.
I do have a question to Mr. Doxey about, do you know when the design project is done, is that when it's billed out or paid out, I should say? So do you know when approximately that might be?
If I may, through your worship, the invoicing for these types of projects typically begins about a month to 2 months after they are initiated or executed with the consultant. and they're kind of paid out, or it's not kind of, they are paid out as the hours are submitted on the project. So the first month when they start incurring hours and equipment, materials, and supplies, they invoice accordingly, and we process those and distribute them across the various accounts, and it starts the process immediately.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yep.
Any other questions? I have one. And I'll wait for the- Okay, Mr. Doxey, just a question, if I may. The engineering, $220,000, is that strictly engineering? Is that something that could have been done had we had an engineer on staff, handled by them?
Part of it, yes, but part of it also includes geotechnical investigative work. It includes public engagement. So some of it we could have done in-house or could do in-house, but some of it is definitely work that requires additional expertise and/or special equipment and materials.
Just as a follow-up, some of it being half of it, being a quarter of it, what I'm trying to get a figure on, if it's half of it, that's $100 and some odd thousand. That almost paid for one engineer on staff, instead of paying it out to an engineering company. Just a thought, bear it in mind when the budgets come up, if you would, please. So,
for sure.
All right, because we've been looking at that since the last budget. All right, we have the recommendation on the floor. I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Butterworth, would you give us this discussion on property tax collection? Did we lose
hold
it?
on.
how I put a hand up or how I make a comment or something, in case there's questions and stuff. I can't find where the put your hand up thing is.
Put your real hand up. That works just as good.
Oh, that's true. Okay, I guess you can see me.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Amanda's watching as well.
All right, I'll do it that way. Anyways, back to the report. COVID-19 is, as we all know, is putting a strain on the financial resources of many property taxpayers in Parksville. And senior levels of government are providing funding to many of those impacted, but it's not known yet at this time how quickly those funds will get to those in need, or if they're going to be sufficient to cover their payment obligations. And so the provincial government has indicated, subsequent to this report writing, that they're not interested in changing the tax due date of July 2nd. So municipal councils have at their disposal options to either delay the tax due date or change the penalties that are charged if people are late on their taxes under Section 235 of the Community Charter. So this report is just to outline some of those options for council for consideration and the recommendations as per the agenda.
Okay. I need a motion from the seconder for the recommendation that we receive this for information.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Chandler, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Discussion? Councillor Wilson, please. Councillor Wilson?
Yes, so I guess, oh no, you know what? I'm going to wait on my comment right now.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Your worship.
Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. So there were 3 recommendations in the collection purpose. Are we looking at moving any of those forward today, or just for receipt of information?
The motion that's on the floor currently is to receive. If you allow me, if I can ask Lucky a question, and I can get back to you on somewhat of an explanation.
Thank you.
Lucky, Director Butterworth, could you tell me, now they've made the decision that they're not going to defer taxes? They've made that decision because as of last Thursday they hadn't paid.
From what I understand, there's no changes to the tax deferrals. So for commercial operations, they would not be able to defer any taxes. There is a large segment of the residential population in this town that would be able to defer their taxes. A lot of them don't utilize it right now. People with families and children can defer taxes. We only have a few that actually do that. So they could defer their taxes if they wanted to. And of course, seniors over 55 can defer their taxes as well. So there's quite a large segment of the, at least residential, that could defer their taxes. Now there's always going to be some that are caught would not have that deferral option. But the majority of the residentials, which is 75% of our tax base, could probably defer their taxes if they so chose or didn't have the financial wherewithal to pay their taxes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Patterson, coming back to you, I'm very disappointed with the province not deferring taxes, but again, I think they're still considering it at this point in time. At least that's what the minister said when we had the conversation on Thursday with her. And it was kind of one of those situations. Staff was looking into what the ramifications were. They were also looking at whether we could defer in Parksville alone and just say Parksville is going to defer the taxes. And if we do that, can we defer paying the region, the school board, and the library who we collect taxes for, which amount to about $7 million a year? They don't defer that, we can't defer taxes because we don't have the money to defer the whole thing. So, Councillor Patterson, I hope that answered your question. If you have anything else, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. I saw Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien hands up. So Councillor Wilson, you first.
So, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I'm a little bothered about not deferring taxes. I went through many of the municipalities are deferring taxes, at least for maybe 60 to 90 days. So I understand that perhaps some people do have a tax deferral option, which is great, but I'm concerned that, well, people might not pay anyway, but I think that deferring them for at least 60 to 90 days might be a good idea right now. That's my feeling on it.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Your Worship. And through to Mr. Butterworth, if I may. Lucky, what would be the latest date that you'd need to know if we were to go for a deferral, because this is a ever-evolving situation that we got going on right now. So when would you need to know whether we were to go into a position saying, yes, we agree to defer taxes? 3 months, you know, obviously tax date is July 1st. What, you know, this is, we're into April right now. When would be the latest time? Like, could we defer this decision to another day? And when would be that latest day before you could make it happen for this year?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor O'Brien. In order to print our tax notices, we have to get them to the printer by the 20th. I think I could probably get a slight extension on that. If we were going to defer the taxes from July 2nd to a later date, due date, then of course we would have a little more time to do the printing. But in order to stay on schedule with a July 2nd due date, we would, the printer has indicated we would have to have the tax notices back to them by July or by April 20th. And I think I said, I think we can get a couple more days out of that after the next council meeting, which is on April 20th. Or there's also maybe an opportunity to discuss this further at our budget meeting in a couple days as well, I suppose.
As a follow-up, if I may.
Yeah, please, please.
I'm just trying to think out loud, like what happens if we sent them out at the normal time? It sounds like it's pretty quick coming up. That was April 20th, I'm assuming you're saying. So what happens if we send them out and say the taxes are due July 1st, but to add in a suggestion that there may be no penalties charged until like September 1? It's just an option, that things we can look at.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can just make a comment for everybody. One of the options in there, which you know, it's really hard to say. I think what we really want to do is at least collect some taxes. If we push the date out, then anybody who defers their taxes, we don't get that money till even later. We do have an obligation to the RDN of 6.2 million on August 1st. The province has indicated they're not changing that date at this point in time anyways. I think Keith and I may have a discussion with our contact at the ministry and just see if there's any way that, you know, that can be split, or maybe half that payment deferred out later or something. But it puts a real challenge on us to not collect taxes until after that date. Because that's such a large payment. If it was a smaller payment, then I think we would have more options. So that's a challenge. And so any pushing out of the date just defers a lot of stuff as far as the deferrals, people who do defer. And I think there's going to be a lot more who will defer their taxes this year anyways, even if the date is pushed out. And so those payments all come in later. And yeah, so that's just, it just pushes everything out by deferring that. One of the options on there, which I'd really like council to at least consider or think about, is the one where we reduce the penalty down to 1%. If we have a 0% penalty, probably very few people may pay their taxes. Although that might be another option anyways, at least to have a due date. So then mortgage companies and everybody else and people on deferrals have to pay their taxes by that date, or they won't be able to defer. But a 1% penalty on a $3,000 property tax payment is $30. So it's not super onerous, a small penalty like that, but it would encourage, I think, a lot of people who can pay their taxes to still pay them by that date, which would then give us the money we need by August 1st. So that's just something that I'd like council at least to consider that option, or think about that option, to whether that's viable or not, or whether that makes sense.
Can I make a decision, comment, and hopefully see if we can do something with this? I would prefer to defer this till the next meeting, till April the 20th. That way we're going to know if, hopefully we should know by then whether the province is going to do it or not going to do it. I think the pressure is going to be on them to do this. I mean, God, they're giving 65-cent deferrals for BC Hydro. Why wouldn't they be doing this for taxes? But you never know where they're going to go. So I would say let's wait for one more meeting. Let's see what they say at that point in time. And if at that point in time, then we can make a decision whether to lower the rate and look at what the costs are to do all the other things and go from there. That would be my suggestion. Somebody done?
Adam has a question.
Pardon?
Adam had a question.
Adam, did you have your hand up?
Did, yeah. I just wanted to say I support that that idea to defer it, and also want to say thanks very much to Lucky for putting together those options. I think there's a lot to consider in there, and there's some really good information to consider. So I definitely do support the deferral, so we can have a little bit more information before making a decision on this.
All right, so you're seconding my motion to defer it?
I am.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, we're going to defer it till the 20th then. Thanks, folks. Okay, Councillor Wilson, you're up here now. Could you please give us the background on your issue regarding the grant and aid applications?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Grant and Aid Select Committee met virtually to discuss the allocation of funding for the spring 2020 intake and committee recommendations as are per the council agenda. The committee acknowledges all the applicants and decided to grant funding of $1,925 to 4 organizations. Mount Arrowsmith Pipe Band for their countless musical contributions to Oceanside, Oceanside Building and Learning for their Books for Babes literacy program, Oceanside Kid Fest Festival Society to provide a free family-based day of activities in the park, and the Oceanside Stroke Recovery Society to support their ongoing programs for stroke survivors. Any money not allocated will be added to the fall grant funding.
Thank you. Are you making the motion to for the recommendations 1 and 2?
Yes.
Okay, seconder for that? Somebody seconding the...
I'd second it.
Councillor Fras, the second again. First off, thanks to the committee for doing this. I know this is a thankless job and it never seems to get any easier when it comes to the discussion, but good job. I'll call the question. And all those in favor? Oh, pardon me? Adam had a question? Oh, I thought he was seconding, so he's all right, go ahead, Adam. I can't hear you. Pardon?
May have all froze.
Adam?
Oh. There we go. It does that every so often.
I see the mayor's mic is muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
No, we're good.
There we go.
We just
All
had
right,
a-
Adam, wherever you are on my list, because they all changed around there. Can you give us your question again, please?
Yeah, I had a question there. My question was just regarding grant and aids. We haven't had this kind of situation come up before where we have this COVID issue lockdown, and in the situation where things like Kids Fest, where we grant the money for a festival and it can't go ahead. In this case, I know we had approved some funding for Foster Park for the Easter egg hunt, which got canceled. What's the expectation? Is there been any thought or conversation around what happens to that money if we hand it out and it doesn't get utilized for what it was intended?
That's a good question for the committee to answer what they would like.
I'd be happy to answer that if I could.
Councillor Chandler, go ahead, please.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fras. Councillor Fras, generally what would happen, that event is actually on August 14, 15, that weekend. The consideration was made that we may be okay by then. We don't know. But typically what that event would do is move over probably a month or possibly 2 months to make it still happen. But that may not happen at all. So you're correct that we should have a plan in place, but that could be funding for the following year or two as well.
If I can follow up to that.
Please.
I guess the question also goes to, like, as mentioned, we did hand out money for the Easter egg hunt, which didn't go forward. So what's our expectation in that kind of situation where money that we have allocated for grant and aid isn't being utilized? Are they just going to carry forward then for next year type thing, or have we asked for them to return it, or has there been any thoughts towards that?
Hold on, I'm getting something from the CAO on this. Hold on for a second. Go ahead.
Just use your
You
mic.
can speak on the mic. Here we go.
If it may, your worship, folks hear me?
Speak louder.
So if I may, I think what we could do in this situation is when we send the check with the requisite amounts, we could stipulate that it be returned if the event is canceled due to COVID-19, or that they could just, I guess, roll
Carry
it
it
to
forward.
next year, but we could certainly stipulate some direction that, they don't get to keep it if they don't do the event.
All right. What's everybody's opinion on it?
If I could, my thoughts would be that we have some kind of clause in there that's understood that if the monies don't ever get used as intended, that it gets returned. So whether it's COVID-19 or any kind of event cancellation, so that any groups that are receiving it for grant and aid for an application, I think the expectation should be they return if they don't use it.
I think that's fair. Anybody else wants to weigh in on it?
I would support that. I think that's a very good way to look at it. And I think I'm thinking the same thing as far as these events. I'm just not sure what's happening. So
Perhaps I'm hearing a friendly amendment to be put onto this that would say something to that effect.
Yep.
If the mover and seconder are okay with a friendly amendment, then just write that into it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Councillor
Yeah.
O'Brien, hold on for a second. Councillor O'Brien has something to say.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to Debbie Tardif there. Isn't that also on the application, as I recall, on the grants and aid, if that money isn't to be used, that it has to be returned to the city of Parksville? Is that already not part of that application?
I'm not aware of that. Amanda would know.
Amanda?
I'm
She's
racking my
looking
brain.
puzzled too.
I can try and pull it up on my.
I'll do that.
Okay, but
We have had someone in the past return it when their event didn't take place.
and I would think that if we could put it in as amendment, we could put it in the letter, should your event not go forward, the expectation is to return the fund. Or, you know, use it for the following year for the same use. Something along those lines. Councillor Fras, would you like to give us your friendly amendment?
Yeah, I'll put that forward as amendment. I'm not sure if it already is in the application. I guess that's what they're looking for, but if it's not, I'd like her to have something to that effect in there. So I'll put that forward as amendment.
All right. Seconder for the amendment?
I don't believe so.
Marilyn, is your hand? Okay.
I'll second it.
Seconded. All right. Discussion on the amendment?
Oh.
All right, then I'm going to call a vote on the amended motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. All right, so that's good. Thanks for the votes. Mrs. Keon, could you please give us background on the issue regarding security tender?
Your Worship, this should be relatively straightforward. The reason why this is coming before council is that the combined amount for both the combined amount for both contracts exceeds the amount that the CAO can approve without a council resolution. This was originally two separate tenders, but the original commissioners pulled out, and so $106,000, and I'm only allowed to approve $100,000. So recommendations are to approve this award and do both mobile and static security to footprints for 2020.
I need a mover.
So moved.
I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation.
So moved.
Who's moving? Is that you, Al? Moving? All right, seconded by
So moved.
Councillor O'Brien. Discussion? No discussion? All right, then, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Moving right along. Mr. Martin, could you please give us a background on the issue regarding dedicated memorial bench and tree policy, number 3.42?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So at the May 22nd, 2019 meeting, Council repealed the dedicated park bench and tree planting policy number 3.23 and directed staff to draft a new policy including new funding and renewal structure. So the city has been offering the public the opportunity to dedicate park benches and trees as a memorial to celebrate events since 1996. The policy has been revised twice, once in 1998 and again in 2005. Council asked staff to draft a new policy that would have benches offered at a cost of $3,000, that the number of memorial benches available for purchase be capped at 200, that memorial benches be in place for a maximum of 10 years, and that existing memorial benches be extended for a period of 5 years. And lastly, the memorial tree program be maintained with the current costs and conditions. Council has in front of them at this time the new policy as it is written, capturing those, as well as a new form for dedicating memorial benches and or trees.
Thank you. I need a mover and a seconder to the recommendation for points 1 and 2.
Move.
Moved by Councillor Chandler, seconded by.
I'll second that.
Okay, discussion on this. It was 3,000 that we thought was the price of, or that we proposed as the price for the bench, was it not? Back when we originally put it through. Okay. All right. All right.
I think she's.
Did this go through the Parks and Trails Committee?
No, it did not. So this was done before the committee was struck up.
Okay.
So it's been on the table for a while, and I had some time, so
all right,
got her done.
In the future, we'll do that, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Councillor,
all right.
Question?
Pardon me?
Councillor Fras.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Teresa, Councillor Patterson.
Sorry.
Your worship,
Yes,
a question, I'm not sure to who. The current memorial benches and trees that have plaques or anything, some of them have been there for extended periods of time, and I realize that it's going to be, that we're going to extend for another 5 years. Does operations or parks have a list of names or of who the recipients or who has a bench or a tree or anything in the community that they could have a chance to renew their bench or plaque or anything after the 5-year period?
good question.
Through the mayor to Councillor Patterson. I believe we do. Some of the older records, or I'm not entirely sure of as yet, and I will look into that. The trees themselves will not lose their memorial status. It's the benches that are the sort of the hot ticket and the hot button, specifically down at Community Park. We would offer, of course, people the option of renewing that bench for 5 years. And I do know that there are some folks online that they do have their name and number and contact info. And some of them, as you've stated, go back quite far. And, you know, we'll use every reasonable effort to try to find people and contact them to make sure they're aware that the 5-year clock has started and that there are options at that time of what they can do.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And a question back to Mr. Martin, if I may. Is there a backlog right now, Guy, with requests for benches and or trees until this policy had been revised?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Brien. Yes, there is. There's been a few prior to my arrival, and just in the short time of what I've been able to ascertain after the May 22nd meeting of 2019, when the policy was repealed, they stopped all dedications at that time. So I know there's a list. There's a stack of them ready to go. Yes.
And as a follow-up, if I may, Your Worship, and I understand in the past we had a proliferation of benches in the community park. Everybody wants to be in the community park, of course. Has that been solved or so forth? Have other sites been identified as possible memorial sites for benches?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Brien. I believe that sort of the practice that we are going to take is not to add any more benches into community parks. So if you did want to buy, once those are full, they're full. You know, once they're all dedicated, you know, we don't want to turn it into a complete, you know, stadium style seating by any means. You know, we want it to still be an inviting space for people to come to and encourage people to choose other areas to memorialize or dedicate. And there's many fine spaces within the city, other parks with great view corridors, and you know, that will be more than welcome to folks. Once we can start to see where we're at, and once council chooses to either follow the recommendations within the report, then we'll really dig down to the bones and see where we're at.
Martin, if they had a bench, it's going to be renewed for 5 years, if I understand correctly. And if that's the case, you could possibly pay you another $1,500 and renew it for another 5 years, so I get my full 10 years out.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing the mayor.
Oh, sorry. I'll try yelling in the microphone a little bit louder. I was saying, if I had a bench for 15 that's already there, so I've got it for 5 more years according to this, is it feasible that at that time, or at this time, I could pay another $1,500 and extend it for a full 10 years?
Well, I think the intent of the program is...
Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay. I believe the intent of the program, as what came from council, was that it's $3,000 to dedicate a memorial bench. So we're going to give people a 5-year extension, and then at that point, if they want to then purchase that bench and there's no waiting period for anybody else, it's $3,000 again. That's how we're able to actually turn over our bench inventory, which is declining. You know, there's is the old wooden style on rusted metal that is a maintenance difficult to look after that type of asset. So, and the benches is really a net zero gain on this $3,000, as you know. So
I'm in total agreement. That's no problem with that. I think that's a good way to handle it. All right. So, any other questions? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I haven't had one no tonight so far. All right, bylaws, 3 readings, fees and charges amendment bylaw 2020 number 1515.5 to implement dedicated memorial program charges. So, and then there's council remuneration and expense amendment bylaw 2020 number 1472.5 to amend council remuneration and expenses bylaw 2011 number 1472. I'll be taking both at the same time. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by?
So moved.
Councillor Greer. Discussion?
You come get the dog?
Pardon me?
Somebody get the dog.
I muted Guy.
All right, if there's no discussion, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Parks and Open Spaces Committee recommendations. The minutes from the April 2nd meeting will be received by council at our April 20th meeting. However, in the meantime, would either of the council members on Parks and Open Space Committee like to provide an update from the committee meeting? I read that. So, Councillor Fras or Councillor O'Brien, do you have any comments you want to make on Parks and Open Spaces from the last meeting?
Looking for my notes right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may.